From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Baseball Show. Paul Mancano and John Meoli. We have changed locations yet again. We're now in our editor-in-chief's office. John, if you're watching live on X or YouTube, you can see over John's shoulder that he's got some cartoon that one of our employees here has created of a guy saying Balmer.
Yeah, have you learned about pronouncing locations in Baltimore recently, Paul?
I have. I talked about it more on a Banner Ravens podcast, kind of in hot water in the Baltimore social media community for how I pronounced Towson. I know now that I was wrong for putting a Z where there was an S. It is Towson. It is not Towson, John. Did you know this in all the years that you've lived in Baltimore that there was such a fine distinction?
I mean, as a former Towson Times reporter, I didn't know there was a wrong way to say it.
Really?
I just knew there was the way to say it. I didn't know,
You didn't know somebody could screw it up that badly.
I didn't know anyone could screw it up, period. Like, I didn't think there was any wrong way to say it.
Yeah.
And now I know, like,
I was kind of hoping that the basketball team would actually win the CAA tournament, get in the tournament so I could do another video and redeem myself. Also thinking about doing an apology video. There's all kinds of, or I should just, hold the L and move on.
Do they do spoiler alerts for like men's basketball conference tournaments? Towson lost.
They lost yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's already over.
Haven't been following it too closely.
Yeah. Last night.
I'm sorry for them.
Yeah. Fans are a little frustrated. They haven't been to the tournaments since the 90s, since the early 90s.
Loyola made in 2012.
Wow.
Yeah. Jimmy Patsos.
That's big.
It was great. I drove. We were at, I was coaching hockey. I graduated the year before and I was coaching the hockey team. We were at Nationals in Atlantic City and we had like a 10 a.m. game. And I drove from Atlantic City to Pittsburgh to watch Loyola get just absolutely waxed by Ohio State.
Yeah, what seed were they?
15, not a 16,
Ooh,
a 15. And
okay.
I drove across the state of Pennsylvania to watch it, and then drove back for our game the next day. It was pretty cool.
Wow. Well, UMBC, what year was that?
2018 or 19?
Something like that.
Do you want to hear my UMBC story?
Yeah, do you have one?
Okay, yes.
We're in March.
Yes. I think that was 2019.
Okay.
Because I was at spring training. The Orioles did like a 2-day. Yes, it was 2019. They did like a 2-day like East Coast thing. They played like, I don't even know who. I think the Mets and somebody else on the East Coast of Florida. And on the way back across Florida, I stopped in like what is the middle of Florida.
There's really nothing there. By the way, in the middle of Florida.
A town called Sebring. I went to like a very small like non-televised wrestling show at the Sebring Community Center.
How was that?
It was fantastic.
Really?
It was awesome.
Are you a wrestling guy?
I was a wrestling guy.
This is good to know.
And I thought it would be worth it to stop there. I did. I saw, like, as I was leaving that like UMBC was beating Virginia. I went to, and I was like, all right, I'm going to find somewhere to watch, even though I had like a 2-hour drive, the rest of the way back across Florida in like the middle of the night. And I decided to go and find a place to watch it. And I ended up at like an actual Roadhouse, like a really seedy, like they didn't care about the game at all. It was on, but like no one was paying attention to it. Like it was like a place that was like one of those, like, we are outside theoretically because there's no walls. So like, feel free to smoke in here type places.
Wow.
And that was where I
really
watched it. And I was like locked in, and like it was just like, it was like a little bubble. And then I watched it and I left. And I got back to Sarasota like very early in the morning, and like 7 a.m. clubhouse next day. Let's go. And
the thing is, you could have left there with a few minutes left in the game because it was a blowout from what I recall.
It felt like I didn't need to watch all of it, but I was pretty committed at that point. I was there till the end.
That's fair. Yeah, it was history. All right. Well, we're not going to talk March Madness on this show more than we already have. But we will talk baseball because the Orioles are in the midst of spring training down in Sarasota, Florida. We're going to talk about the myriad injuries that have hit this team. But first, John, we've gotten now a handful of games under our belt that we can wildly react to one way or the other, overreact to spring training. And I think the one thing that fans are realizing very quickly, if they did not already know, is that Samuel Basallo is a superstar in the waiting. He is taking spring training by storm. He's dominating Grapefruit League action. He's hitting 293 this spring, hit an absolute monster home run yesterday in a game that was broadcast on Masson. And I mean, everything that you've written about this guy, everything that we've heard about this guy at just 20 years old, one of the best prospects in baseball. he's now getting to do it in front of fans and on television, and people are realizing just how good this guy's going to be.
Yeah, and I think this is a player who I think we have to recalibrate. Like last year was not because he didn't hit 20 home runs and have 1,000 OPS across 3 levels. So everyone's like, oh, last year wasn't the best year in AAA or AA, but it was a pretty good year. And this happened with Connor Norby at one point. It's happened to guys who are oh, they didn't have the best year, and it was still a really good year. And you're like, if this is the floor, if this is what it's like when they're struggling, when they get comfortable, when they get set, what is it going to be? And I think that having him have this experience is incredibly valuable for the Orioles. I don't think I ever considered him I think there was a chance he was going to be the next on the same level as the Adley and then Gunnar and then Jackson. I think that was always there.
Yeah, number one prospect in baseball.
Yeah, I think that's challenging to do as a catcher if you're not a really good defensive catcher. But this guy is just. It was always going to be clear that he was going to hit. The player that he looks up to and wants to be is Yordan Alvarez, and I think anyone would sign up for that without question.
Yeah.
Yordan Alvarez has been with robot umps, and you just have to catch the ball and throw the ball, and he has a cannon that plays. And I think that we're talking about spring training, but it would be more concerning. Not more concerning. It wouldn't be concerning at all if he had a bad spring. He's not going to play a meaningful role in this team if all goes according to plan, but you want to see him do well, and you want to see him carry this momentum into the season, and I think he's doing that.
Yeah, I mean, he is probably going to start the season AAA until, Gary Sanchez, assuming Gary Sanchez stays healthy, Basayo is not going to see the majors this year until maybe September. If when rosters expand, the Orioles decide they want to get him his first taste of big league action, but you would also understand if the Orioles kept him down in AAA the entire season. Let him go into 2026 with a chance to make the big league roster. But long-term, this guy is going to find a place on a roster. Adley Rutschman is your long-term catcher, obviously, for the next several years. But if it's first base, if it's DH, if it's splitting time with Adley behind the plate, like you said, robot umps make it a little bit easier.
Yes.
The Orioles will find a place for him. And quite frankly, as we're going to talk about with when it comes to pitching and possible trades and how they could upgrade their roster, he's about as close to untouchable as you can get.
Yeah, and what they have traded over the last, they really only started trading prospects like the Corbin Burns trade, and then and then did a lot last year, but they're very comfortable trading from the middle tier of their prospect base, the good, not great guys, and Joey Ortiz could be really good, but he's not that type of guy. And I think Basayo and Coby Mayo and Heston Kjerstad, who's still prospect eligible for Baseball America, are their own tier there. And those are the guys who, I think they were right to hold on to, if we're being honest.
Yeah. You mentioned Coby Mayo, and we try not to overreact to spring training one way or the other. However, Coby Mayo is just 3 for 28 so far this spring with 1 extra base hit. What do you think is going on right now with Coby Mayo? Going back to last year when he struggled in a small sample size in the big leagues, I think that was understandable because that was his first taste of the big leagues. Is there any concern level for you right now, or is it at a 0?
Probably not. This is also another player who, I think there's probably comfort in he's not playing for a job right now.
Right.
If he was, and this was if this was Jackson Holiday last year, we were this guy can make the team. And then he has that pressure, and it's on top of him, and he doesn't do it. Then you think about, okay, that's kind of a challenge. That's that's something that you look into. But he had a really good spring last year, and he performed really well in AAA, and then got to the majors and wasn't on time with the fastball, and everything was challenged from there. He's a player who has always, every level he's played at, whether it's AA, he got to AA, struggled, came back better for it. Got to AAA, struggled, got good at it, then came back and was obviously better at AAA. I assume that when he gets back to the big leagues, it's going to be fine. I don't know, particularly what's going on right now, but I'm not super concerned personally.
Yeah, I mean, his swing seems just to the naked eye so much more complex than somebody like Samuel Basayo's, somebody who has a quick stroke to the ball and just kind of very easy power. It seems like a lot of things. Coby Mayo's a big dude. So is Samuel Basayo, but Coby Mayo is a big guy. He's 6'5".
Yeah.
And it just seems like a lot of things have to line up for him to get a hold of the ball. But once he gets a hold of the ball, it goes really far.
Yeah.
So just him getting to work with the Orioles hitting coaches, getting to work with Cody Ashley is not going to be, he's going to be focused on the big league roster this year more than he ever has. So takes him out of the equation. But whoever Coby Mayo needs to get with and figure things out in AAA, I have pretty high confidence that he will be able to do that. And like you said, they won't, unless another injury hits them, and we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, they won't be calling on Coby Mayo early in the season.
Yeah, I think that's right.
All right, let's talk about the injuries, because a couple of weeks ago, John, on this podcast, we said the Orioles are the deepest team that has ever been assembled under Brandon Hyde and Mike Elias. Look at all these guys, and they're just teaming with talent. The 26-man roster is going to be one of the most loaded in all of baseball. And that depth is going to be tested early.
Yeah.
Because we learned that Grayson Rodriguez will miss the start of the big league season. We learned that Gunnar Henderson is dealing with stuff. We learned that Andrew Kittredge will be out a long time. Let's break down those 3 injuries that the Orioles are dealing with. Let's start with Gunnar Henderson. I want to get your panic meter on a scale of 1 to 10 about how panicky you are about him, because if he can't play on opening day, then if he is not on this roster on opening day, then who plays shortstop for this Orioles team?
So panicky just on Gunnar Henderson?
Yeah, let's start with Gunnar Henderson.
Go 1.5. Like,
okay.
Not super panicky.
Still no timetable for his return, according to Brandon Hyde yesterday.
No. Today it seems like he's doing stuff. Whether today or tomorrow, he's doing stuff. I think that once you get into this part of spring training where there's a couple weeks before games start, you're a little more challenged to ramp up. You don't want to rush him. Like, there's also days where, like, he could stay in Florida for a week and not, go to play at Nats Park and like not go to Toronto and be back for like the home opener. And like, you're talking about Gunnar Henderson playing 156 games this year, which is basically what he did last year. Yeah. And he's no worse for wear. I kind of think that Jackson Holliday would just be like the shortstop, because then you could just have Ramon Urias, who's like a really good player and is on your roster and is here for a reason, like play second or third, and Jordan Westburg doesn't have to move. And like, you just do that for a little bit, because I do think it's going to be a little bit of time. But I'm not necessarily sweating that for Gunnar Henderson. Like, is there a small chance that this turns out to be the type of thing where like, oh, we should have known this was going to be one of those dumb seasons where, he's not ever right physically because of this happened in spring training? Yes, but he also like was slow to get going last year with the oblique and like was in the MVP race until like the All-Star break and still was one of the 5 best players in baseball. So we're talking about like somebody who's really good and like very young. Like, this is the type of stuff that you can recover from. Yeah.
Mild intercostal strain is what he's dealing with right now. And it was the lat last year that he started spring training with. And I remember he was slow to get into Grapefruit League action. And then he ended up being a 9-WAR player by the end of the season. And like you said, playing over 150 games. Yeah. And I think if you are thinking about who plays shortstop on opening day, you have options. I mean, I think Jordan Westburg could do it in a pinch, but he hasn't done it a whole lot. Ramon Urias has done it, but not in a couple of years. He played 8 games there, I think, in 2022, but not really since then. But to me, the favorite has to be Jackson Holliday. He played there last night at shortstop. He was really converted to second base. He came up as drafted as a shortstop, played a lot of shortstop, mostly shortstop in the minor leagues. And it wasn't until the Orioles said, we're going to stick with Gunnar at short. We're going to have Jordan Westburg play third. Jackson Holliday, you got to learn second base full time, that he became a full-time second baseman. And honestly, I'm not worried about messing with his footwork. I'm not worried about his development. He's the number 1 overall pick. He's the former number 1 overall prospect. The guy is incredibly talented. He's incredibly young. He should be able to handle a switch to shortstop. He should be able to handle both of those middle infield positions with relative ease.
Yeah. And again, I don't think it's going to be like a long-term thing. If it is, like, we're revising this and like, then you're talking about like, adding someone to the roster who isn't really in the picture right now. And like, sure, that's out there.
Yeah.
But if it is a long-term thing, then you have Jorge Mateo back soon-ish, probably. Yeah. And then you're talking about somebody who has filled, who is still here because every time they need him, he does something helpful, and that's okay. But my panic meter on Gunnar Henderson is lower than I think most.
Yeah, I think the panic meter is going to increase on these next 2, however. Let's get to Andrew Kittredge, veteran reliever that the Orioles signed to a 1-year deal a few months ago. He's dealing with a left knee injury and will undergo arthroscopic surgery to address an issue with the cartilage in his left knee. He is 34 years old, turning 35 very soon. He has dealt with serious injuries in the past. Last year, pitched in 70 games, was fully healthy, but pitched in really missed a ton of time in the 2022-2023 seasons. How high is your panic meter for Andrew Kittredge here?
Higher, like 4.5.
Really?
I don't know. I mean, obviously out for a long time. I don't know that this is going to impact him when he comes back. We talked before about like the past free agent reliever forays, and like Michael Givens had a knee injury in spring training and was never the same.
Yep.
And I don't believe has pitched in the big league since. Andrew Kittredge is a guy who like takes the ball. When he's good, he will take the ball and he will give you he will be good when he does it. So for this to have gotten to the point where he needed the surgery and like for him to feel it and be like, this is an issue, I think that's relevant and like speaks to the severity of it. So does surgery. That's the basic part. I think that he was like a light luxury item, he's not like completely like, oh, we don't need this guy, but like let's go sign him anyways. I think that role is important to have like as many good relievers as possible. Like he was the 4th all-star in that bullpen. And like there's probably not a lot of teams that have 4 guys who have been to all-star games in their not that matters, but like you have to pitch well for a pretty long amount of time at some point in one season to be an all-star. So that is meaningful to have, but like that doesn't impact the end of games as much as it impacts like the middle parts. And I think that's where, kind of my operating theory on like how this team gets good is that like, or gets better is that they are able to like take some close games in the middle of games and win them because they have a lot of good relievers to deploy in a lot of different situations. And like the offense is just good and takes those games. This is a team that went months without like winning a game that they were trailing after 6 innings last year. That's the type of thing that happens when you're bringing in somebody you claimed on waivers in the 6th inning because you need to keep your good relievers for the 7th and 8th and 9th, and then you lose those games. You don't get to use for good relievers. So like I want to have somebody like Andrew Kittredge for those spots, but I'm not sure it will be fatal if they do not have that.
Yeah, he's not a make or break piece. I mean, this is why Michael Elias built up a lot of depth in the bullpen, especially this past offseason.
Yeah.
I mean, the midseason trades that they made last year certainly go a long way towards helping that. Getting Sir Anthony Dominguez, getting Gregory Soto, those guys as proven veteran relievers. Yeah, Felix Bautista coming back. I know he didn't look great last night, but he said he's still on track for opening day. All you're looking for is him to hit the upper 90s with his fastball and for him to come out of every start or every outing looking healthy in the Grapefruit League action. So you have those 3 guys at the back end of your bullpen. Keegan Aiken had a great year last year. Yennier Cano, you still expect to be very good in your bullpen. And then it's a matter of Albert Suarez. It's,
Cianel Perez making real money. Like he's there still.
Cianel Perez, Brian Baker is still on this team. You signed Matt Bowman, who started last night's game, to a minor league deal. So you have options to start the year. And it sounds like Andrew Kittredge is going to miss a lot of time. But like you said, John, he's not a luxury, but he would have been a very nice piece to have for the majority of this season. But it doesn't make or break your bullpen if you lose Andrew Kittredge for a significant amount of time.
Yeah. It's just somebody you want to have available if he's there.
Exactly. This next injury, however, though, John, might draw the highest grade on your panic meter, and that's Grayson Rodriguez. Grayson Rodriguez has right elbow inflammation, and he went out for his second start of the spring a couple weeks ago, pumped in an 89-mile-an-hour fastball, and everyone said, uh-oh, what's going on here? Came out of that start, said just wasn't feeling great, couldn't command the ball, couldn't get behind the ball, something was going on. Hyde announced last Friday that he would miss opening day as he dealt with that inflammation. And then on Sunday, he announced that Grayson was going to receive a cortisone shot to deal with that inflammation as well. He's going to be shut down for a week to 10 days. Brendan Hyde said he hopes that in a couple weeks, Grayson is responding well to the cortisone shot, that he is back up and throwing. But we know that Grayson Rodriguez will not start opening day. He was going to be up there with the Zach Eflin as really the only 2 options on this team who could do that. How worried are you about Grayson Rodriguez right now, John?
It's like a 5.5.
Really?
I mean, I can't recall.
This is nice. You're calming me.
It's also like, it's early and like, I guess I should work backwards from like the end point of like a lot of the things that I'm thinking is that this has been a really good regular season team for a lot of reasons for like 2.5 years now, 2 3/4, like whatever mark of the season. Adley Rutschman came up in 2022. That's how long they've been a really good regular season team. That is not how they're going to be evaluated this year. Like, they are going to be evaluated based on, like, do they win playoff games, series? Like, do they advance deep into October? So, like, until it gets to the point where, like, once you get to the point there is no Grayson Rodriguez for the entire season, then you recalibrate.
Sure.
That's where I kind of fall on this. I'm not saying that I sat down and searched like cortisone shot, Tommy John. But I don't recall a lot of instances where somebody had like elbow damage that required Tommy John and ended up the first line of treatment was a cortisone shot.
Right. This is not the platelet-rich plasma injection that Kyle Bradish got last year, where we knew that there was something wrong with his ulnar collateral ligament, and it was very clear the Orioles were just trying to delay or avoid entirely Tommy John surgery. The cortisone shot is not a PRP injection.
Yeah. And like, there's also guys, Hunter Harvey, like it took him like years to get Tommy John because like every time they imaged it, it looked like it was intact. And then they went in, his like elbow ligament was basically like mush. Right. Like you can't tell that one on an MRI. So they're like, oh yeah, like this has probably been like ruined for years. Like, but it just didn't look like that. So like there are instances where there's a lot of things that happen around the elbow that turn out to be that. Doesn't feel like that to me, but like it's more concerning in that like there's an opportunity for Grayson Rodriguez to be like the important pitcher that he has always kind of been on track to be, and he still can be. Like if he misses, say his elbow feels great next week, he's probably pitching like early May here. And he's making 24 starts if he stays healthy the rest of the year. And like those can be 24 impactful starts. But I think I'm reserving my panic for if this is like a serious thing, because there is like a lot of downside protection in this rotation. Like you can do a lot worse than Albert Suarez and Cade Povich and like some of the guys who might be options like later in the year coming up from the minors. But you can't do a lot better than Grayson Rodriguez based on what we know his stuff is and like the potential there. And that's where, if you don't have that, that's where I struggle.
Right. I mean, we saw yesterday, the Yankees announced that Garrett Cole was undergoing Tommy John surgery, and there is no replacing Garrett Cole. No. And Grayson Rodriguez is not Garrett Cole. He is not an ace, but it is difficult to replace somebody that you were expecting to be at the top of your rotation. It's just there's only really a handful of guys that you can consider good enough to be an ace of rotation. And the way that things were trending, the Orioles were hoping that Grayson was going to take that step forward this year, and he still could. But it's just very difficult to replace that kind of guy that you were expecting to shoulder that much load this season. The frustrating part, I think, for fans is, well, the Yankees lost Garrett Cole, but they signed Max Fried. And a couple of off seasons ago, they signed Carlos Rodon. And those guys could be considered number ones on other teams. The Orioles have Zach Eflin. He is their number one and only to start the season. They don't have another guy who even comes close to profiling as a number one right now. So they have the depth. I'm not concerned given the fact that they signed Charlie Morton to a one-year deal, that they signed Tomoyuki Sugano to a one-year deal, the fact that Albert Suarez is back on this team. Cade Povich is an intriguing option. However, it's replacing that number one production that concerns me.
Yeah, and this is kind of the crux of Inside the Dugout, the newsletter that I was writing not long before I came out here. That
how can you find that?
I believe if you're a subscriber to the Baltimore Banner, which is $1 for 6 months, you can sign up for it. It's like an add-on, and then you got to go to your spam folder and allow it to send. I think there's a person who lives in my household who just recently figured out that.
Oh, great! Is it one of your two small children?
No, not that one. It's not my cat either. But there will be one extra reader based on having figured that out. So shout out to everyone in the back. We're all working hard.
We're all supporting you.
It feels like, so basically the crux of what I was trying to figure out my thoughts on was like, yes, it would feel great if there was like an ace. And we talked about it on this podcast that the reason that I thought they were going to replace or re-sign Corbin Burns was because like there was a lot of stuff that happened in the rotation that was really not good this year. But like every fifth day, like there was that dude who was going out there, and like most of the season was really good. And like
everything except for the month of August.
Yes. When he was not his best self. And that was incredibly valuable to the Orioles, and like they saw what it looked like. And I think we know from their pursuits that like they understand that. It's like it's just not something they value in a vacuum. Like the difference between like Grayson Rodriguez, I think it was like on Fangraphs, like 2.2 WAR forecast, which is basically the difference between like Corbin Burns and Charlie Morton's. That's basically what it is. Like you're talking about like, so now you basically have that difference and you also have that guy not there.
Right.
Which feels like a lot. I think what I struggled with and seeing, and like this has kind of been discourse that I see and obviously don't participate in, but like if you didn't think the Orioles did a good job in the offseason, you don't need Grayson Rodriguez to get hurt and miss some period of time to keep thinking that. Like you just think that. Like, and that's like there's a very valid like avenue for you to live on and walk down the street every day if you think that. I don't think it makes that right. Like that is going to be borne out over the course of the season. It just feels like challenging to me to be like, well, now they're really screwed because like if you thought Grayson Rodriguez was that guy and it's that big of a deal to not have an ace and not have Grayson Rodriguez, then did you have an ace type substance? Like that's kind of the added level of like concern.
Right.
Feels like it would be there anyways when that is kind of where you are coming from.
Yeah. And I go back to last year when the Orioles traded for Corbin Burns a couple weeks before spring training started. At that time, I think it's fair to make the assumption that they knew that Kyle Bradish was going to be dealing with something. We from the media perspective, didn't know that Kyle Bradish was dealing with a UCL injury until Mike Elias announced it at the start of spring training. But at that point, Mike Elias probably knew that Kyle Bradish was going to miss some time, and that may have influenced him and may have caused him to be more aggressive in his pursuit for an ace starting pitcher.
Yes.
It also helped that maybe a lot of other teams did not know that Kyle Bradish was dealing with that, and therefore maybe Mike Elias was able to extract more value, so to speak, and that in terms of getting Corbin Burns, and he did not have his feet to the fire. Right now, everybody knows Grayson Rodriguez is dealing with an injury, but it is not, so far as we know, close to a season-ending injury. I still think that Mike Elias knows, despite what he has said in spring training, that no, a competitive team does not need an ace. He knows the value of Corbin Burns last year. He saw it firsthand. There's a reason he traded for Corbin Burns.
Yes.
And there's a reason he made an aggressive offer for Corbin Burns this past offseason. He knows what kind of value that player can have. He saw when Justin Verlander joined the Astros and they won a World Series in 2017 midseason. I think that Mike Elias, if he can put together an offer to get an ace, he will still do that at some point between now and July 31st. I don't think this Grayson Rodriguez injury changes his calculus at all. I think he's still on the lookout for that guy. I don't think he's going to force anything if it's not there.
Yeah, and I think this is where, and I think it was pretty valuable when David Rubenstein was down in spring training and talked to Andy Costa and talked to all of us about, his belief in what this front office believes in a sense. There's a world where it happens more in like basketball than baseball, but like Steve Cohen went out and just signed a bunch of free agents that first year because he could. Those were not many of them turned out to be not the best contracts. The Orioles had a backup catcher for 2 years because of one of them, James McCann, got a lot of money and then got traded.
Justin Verlander was one of those guys.
Yeah.
So
they went all out and that didn't happen here.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason it didn't happen here is because the Orioles front office, and that's kind of what I wrote. They know the value of Corbin Burns. They experienced it. They lived it. They tried to get him back, I think, for all intents and purposes. But it's not value in a vacuum. It's not like we value this over all else. They value a lot of things. They value the idea that this team can be really good for a long time. They value the players who could make that be the case. They cut into that significantly last year to support a team that they thought could go farther in the playoffs that they did. They value the ability to do things over a long period of time, not just keeping their players, but Carlos Rodon's first, you mentioned him, he's been fine since, but the Yankees signed him to a massive contract and then his elbow started barking in spring training. He didn't get surgery, but there's two kinds of players whose elbows hurt, like the kinds who get surgery immediately and like the kinds who get surgery eventually.
Right.
And like he's on the eventually track, and like Garrett Cole pitched last year without having surgery and like came back and he was fine, and now he's not. Like these types of things happen, and like those are impactful things to the Yankees, yes, but like to a team like the Orioles as well, if you have those on the books. And like I understand why it's frustrating that is not something that people want to hear. Like they don't care. But it's also like what they think. And I think it's important to just kind of say that because that's how this team is being built.
Yeah, exactly. It's certainly, at the end of the day, this is most frustrating for Grayson Rodriguez because he's dealt with a lot of injuries since he was drafted by the Orioles by Dan Duquette years ago as a first-round pick.
Yeah.
I mean, his first season and full season in pro baseball through 94 innings in 2019 with single-A Delmarva. Pandemic wiped out his 2020 season. Threw just 103 innings in 2021 while they were ramping him back up. 2022 missed a lot of time with injury, threw just 75 and 2/3 innings, and could have debuted potentially at the end of that season. Is it that season?
Yeah, that was when he was basically like about to come up, and it was like, why isn't this guy here? And then he did his lat in like a AAA game in like July.
In July, that's right. Yeah, he was going to pretty much get what we thought might have been his last start in the minors before he was going to get called up.
Yeah.
And then he missed time, came back at the very end of that season. 2023 pitched 163 innings between AAA and Baltimore. Remember, he was going to make the team out of spring, struggled a lot in Grapefruit League action, didn't make the team, came up and ended up bouncing back and forth between AAA and the big leagues while he was essentially adjusting to life in the big leagues. Last year, all right, he's taking the step. He is a regular big league starter. He had an ERA under 4, and then we get to the first week of August, and he suffers another lat injury and misses the rest of the season. So right now, it is the most upsetting for Grayson Rodriguez because it hasn't just been, various circumstances like the pandemic that have prevented him from becoming the ace that everybody thinks he can be. It's also been injuries. He has significantly been impacted by injuries in his career.
And I think about this, the last time we saw him, like his recurrence or whatever happened with his last year happened when he was in the bullpen and he was like, I'm not sure. Like, doesn't feel right. He said that. Like the camera showed him saying that. Got scratched. Didn't pitch again. Like, if this turns out to be something serious, like the fact that he didn't feel good, and like this is spring training, like guys' arms, especially this time, it's a little early for like the spring training, like dead arm outing, like when you're just like don't have it because you started throwing hard like a month ago and like your arm is tired and you're just like have to pitch through that. Like that's a real thing that happens to starters, relievers, everybody in spring training, and like spring training is structured so that like that moment arrives and you just get through it and you're good.
Yeah.
So
I feel like John Means had a lot of those.
Yes. And you get to that point and you're like, all right, I'm good. Like maybe he was like, oh, this is a little early. Like maybe he just thought it was that, but like this is somebody who knows what that feels like. They know he knows what it feels like when he should not be pitching, and he pitched anyways. And like that is a curiosity to me that I would be fascinated to know the answer to why.
Yeah. He's somebody who he's a gamer. He likes to take the ball every 5th day. He wants to pitch through injuries. I know last year he was very frustrated that he couldn't be on the playoff roster. He worked his butt off to try to get back by the end of the season, but time was working against him. Yeah. And I know that he wanted to be on that big league roster against the Royals in the wild card round more than anybody. In terms of replacing him right now in the rotation for the short term, Orioles have options. They have Albert Suarez, who was very good for them last year in both the bullpen and the rotation. To me, it seems like Cade Povich is the best positioned to take over because he showed last year, some flashes. September, he was awesome. Finally got his walks under control, got his strikeout rate started rising a lot. He looked like he could be a potential starter down the road. And the fact that Albert Suarez already showed you that he can be a good reliever as well as a starter, to me tells me Cade Povich could slot into this rotation pretty easily.
Yeah, and we've been around this long enough to know that we're not talking about like an open, like whoever has the best stats makes it makes the team, gets the rotation spot type thing. Cade Povich has been better statistically than Albert Suarez this spring, but I think the tie was always going to go to Albert Suarez just to keep him on the roster, depending on what you want to do with the bullpen. Now without Andrew Kittredge there for a while, like you can still have that like optionable short reliever spot or two if you want it, and you can have Albert Suarez out there and not really feel it. There's no impact. There's no consequence to doing that. And I think that will be helpful to both of their cases. Like if you need Albert Suarez to like relieve, like I haven't gone through and figured out, because by now I think everyone's basically on turn for where they're going to be. And like, you could probably figure out who they want to be starting in these spots based on where they're pitching in games now. So that would be valuable to have done and not just talked about doing live on this podcast. But I'm also really bad at that. That's like one of my non-skills.
Timing out who's going to start on which days.
Yeah. I used to like use like the drawing like thing where you can like take on your phone like in photos and like write people's initials on them, and then I would write it, and everyone else on beat was like, "What are you doing? Like, is that you're wrong?" And I was like, "I don't think so. Here's my thing." And they would look at it and be like, "Yeah, this is wrong."
The math
like,
is
no. I'm right. Thanks, guys. But I think Albert Suarez like can do more roles and I think there's the avenue for it now that there's no Andrew Kittredge in the mix for a while.
Also, would be nice to have a lefty in the rotation. He would be the only one.
Yes.
If everybody were healthy, the Orioles would not have a lefty in the rotation. We know how much they love their matchups. And honestly, it would behoove the Orioles to at some point know what they have in Cade Povich.
Yeah.
He's 25, 24 years old. He's been one of your top prospects for the last couple of years. Ideally, he's not starting once every fifth day for the entire season, because ideally you have a full healthy rotation and Kyle Bradish comes back and maybe you make another addition, but maybe you have something here. And if Cade Povich steps up in the absence of Grayson Rodriguez, it's a nice young piece that you have in your rotation.
Yeah. And I'll say this, and this is like, contradicting myself as somebody who like ranks Orioles prospects on a semi-regular basis. Cade Povich, like there were times in the last couple of years where he was like in the top like handful, like internally of like how they viewed their prospects, not like top handful of pitchers, like top handful period. Like, and that was not reflected like publicly. Like teams would be like, oh, like we can't trade for Jackson Holiday or we can't trade for Colton Cowser, but like Povich is down there on the list. Like, what about him? And the Orioles were like, no, no, like this, we think this guy's like going to be really good. Like they have that view of him, and have had that view of him. And I think there is that belief there. Like, I'm sure there was a world where they would want to be able to have him in the rotation on opening day, like just based on the moves they made. I don't think they showed up in Florida thinking that was the case, but like, it's a nice fallback option to have if they take it.
Yeah, I think obviously they want Grayson Rodriguez healthy, but I don't think that they're upset about having to insert Cade Povich, if he is the guy, into that rotation. I think they want to see what they have in him. I think they believe he can be a good big league starter. And I think there's a justifiable reason to believe that.
Yeah, and like let's see it. We're gonna get the opportunity to.
Exactly.
He's already had the year that a lot of these pitchers have had, where it's just like up, down, not the best. Figure some stuff out, go down and work on stuff. Like that year's already happened. And like, there's a lot of evidence from like in this rotation, in this pitching staff, that like once you have that year, like you are able to kind of kick on in a way that is much better than the beginning of it.
Exactly. Well, we still have a couple weeks until opening day. John, where can everybody find your good work? You're getting better and better at
here at the BaltimoreBanner.com.
There we go.
Paul.
Yeah.
Balmer Banner.
Yeah.
I am. Yeah. There's some spring training stories still to come. Kind of emptying out the notebook inside the dugout, rolling along. I saved them by number. So like this was newsletter number 41.
Okay. Wow.
Which feels like a lot. We're getting close to the year. I think they're going to throw like a huge party for
50
for the year anniversary of Inside the Dugout.
Oh, okay.
I made that up, but we're speaking into existence. You can come if they do.
We got champagne in the fridge.
I understand that. I understand that champagne. Yeah, just writing away, podcasting away.
Exactly.
It's been fun. Did you read the 5-star review on the last one?
I did.
Okay.
Did you? Yeah.
I listened to it. I must have just spaced out. I must have been doing something.
Me and Hayes Gardner are one of our business reporters, and talking about the Massa deal. And I said, it's a shame that John isn't here because we have a 5-star review, and I read it out.
I was close to taking my mom's phone. She was visiting a couple weekends ago, and I was close to filling out a 5-star review on her Spotify, which Which I was like, why do you have Spotify? Which I'm sure she doesn't even like use it, but like
this is from Jay's mom.
Yeah. So my son talks more on this than I've ever heard him talk in his life. I love this podcast.
Wow. Write us a 5-star review and I will read it out here on the show. Like, rate, review, subscribe to the Banner Baseball Show anywhere that you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for tuning in. At John Meoli is his handle. I'm at Paul Mancano and at All Banner Sports. Danielle Allentuck and Andy Koska and Kyle Goon and John have plenty of coverage as the Orioles march towards opening day. Thanks so much for tuning in. For John Meoli, I'm Paul Mancano.